Okay, well, welcome, council. Welcome, members of the public. We'll get this meeting started. It's 1:30, and welcome to the Budget Committee of the Whole. Our first meeting in a series for our first budget process of the new term. I just have some a notice to read first. The city facilities are open to the public to attend council and committee meetings. The public can observe meetings of council and committee meetings by attending in person or by viewing the live stream of the open session part of these meetings, which can be accessed on the city's website. The public may submit written correspondence regarding agenda items by email to clerks@richmondhill.ca, and written correspondence must be submitted by 12 noon, one business day before the meeting. Comments submitted will be provided to all members of council and are considered as public information and will be included on the public agenda posted to the city's website. So any person who wishes to speak to council on agenda items must pre-register with the office of the clerk by 12 noon, one business day before the meeting. Applications to appear as a delegation can be submitted by email to clerks@richmondhill.ca or by using the online application form found on richmondhill.ca. Delegations can be in person or electronically, by video conference or by telephone. The office of the clerk will provide instructions on appearing as a delegation. Okay, so with that, we'll get the meeting started with a motion to adopt the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Silovitz. Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Okay, does any member of the committee have a disclosure of pecuniary interest at this time? Okay, I see none. So the next item is delegations, and I don't believe we have any. Okay, we've got our regular scheduled business, and I'm going to first introduce our treasurer and director of financial services, Gigi Lee, who will introduce the draft capital budget for 2023. Go ahead, Ms. Lee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's my pleasure to come before you today at this Budget Committee of the Whole meeting to kick off the 2023 budget. I'll start by providing a backdrop of the annual process that we undertake. The city creates an operating budget to plan for the day-to-day operations residents rely on, such as fire services, parks maintenance, snow clearing, and much more. The operating budget includes costs for salaries, materials, and supplies to provide those services, and it's largely funded by tax dollars and user fees. In addition, the city also creates a capital budget to plan for the infrastructure costs related to roads, parks, community centers, and other city buildings to ensure the necessary infrastructure are in place to support a vibrant and connected municipality. The capital budget is funded through Richmond Hill's reserve funds, development charges, grants, and other external funding. Richmond Hill's budget cycle begins in the spring and aims to be approved by council by December for the following year, with the exception of the budget following a general municipal election, which is the reason why we're having these discussions through January and February for 2023. In December, Council approved early approval of capital expenditures for time-sensitive projects to ensure seamless delivery of the city's capital program. We're here today to present to you the 2023 draft capital and 9-year forecast. As in the last year, this year's process builds on the partnership between finance and infrastructure and engineering services. It's also the result of extensive collaboration and engagement and participation from all capital delivery requesting divisions across the organization. Richmond Hill's capital planning process is managed through an asset management lens and is integrated with the city's enterprise asset management system to ensure the city prioritizes the right projects at the right time for optimal use of available funding and maximum value to taxpayers. The result is a fiscally responsible budget that is balanced with the delivery of the city's key plans and strategies. Executive Director Mazzaro and I will walk you through the presentation where he will outline the capital projects and details on the investments, and I will focus on the funding of the city's 10-year capital program. With that, I'll turn it over to Executive Director Mazzaro.
Thank you. Next slide. Good day, Mr. Chair and everyone in council. This is the second capital budget that's being presented leveraging the city's asset management system. I want to start the presentation by extending my many thanks to everyone involved for their contributions in every division across the city, especially the corporate asset management team, as well as our financial management advisors for their efforts, making the budget process another milestone in evidence-based decision-making. The team has made transitioning during fiscally challenging times seamless. Our collaborative work on their part, bringing this budget document together, has been rewarding to oversee and a privilege. In the end, a 2023 capital budget and a 9-year forecast is well positioned to meet the city's and the community's needs, which is before you today for consideration and approval. Next slide. Here are the agenda items that we'll go over in the presentation, starting with a summary of our assets and a review of how our capital programs are developed. And we'll round out with items 5 and 6, handing back over to the city treasurer. Next slide. Summary of the city's assets. Next slide. Infrastructure lays the foundation for city building and provides significant opportunities for economic growth, competitiveness, and improved quality of life. I recognize that for returning council, this isn't new. However, for the benefit of members of council that are new and the public at large who may be joining us today, it's important to describe and reiterate the magnitude of what the city owns and what we need to maintain. Consistent with the city's asset management plan, all of the inventory of our assets are divided into 11 categories called subservices, here and separated by what legislation has defined as core and non-core. Core infrastructure is the typical linear infrastructure assets, such as roads, sewers, water, and stormwater, while non-core is just about everything else, such as rec facilities, parks, etc. In the last 20 years, our population has more than tripled to over 200,000, and it's ranked the 27th most populous community across the country. This is important because along with growing populations comes the need for more infrastructure assets to support the population increase. And we're seeing a time now where many of our infrastructure assets, as well as those associated with our community centers, is requiring more intervention to maintain a state of good repair. Next slide. The summary of the city's assets is basically what we own. The council approved 2021 asset management plan provided an update on the assessment and condition of the city's core assets. The city owns $9.2 billion worth of core and non-core infrastructure assets. And the first pie chart on the left shows the breakdown by the subservice asset class. And the one on the right speaks to the condition of those assets. Currently, the city is well positioned with about 90% of the overall assets being in good or very good condition. However, assets continually need proactive investments to maintain their condition, to provide services, as well as eventual rehabilitation and replacements. While the budget's primarily focused on traditional civil linear assets and facility or other non-infrastructure partners such as IT, fleet, parks, the libraries, and the such are also incorporated into the asset management plan that will be updated in 2024. To quickly summarize for the audience and gain a sense of the magnitude of our inventory, that's 580 kilometers of roads, 1,800 kilometers of sewers, 100 ponds, 850 kilometers of sidewalks and trails. And from the non-core category, over 65 city buildings. That includes our community centers, pools, arenas, libraries, fleet equipment, vehicles, as well as the IT infrastructure that keeps us all connected in our digital world. So it's important at this point to reflect on that $9.2 billion of inventory of assets that we're all collectively responsible for, that support the community. And as our community and assets increase in age over time, that funding required to maintain them will also increase. Next slide. A review of how our capital projects are developed and delivered. Next slide. Here's a graphic that's intended to visually demonstrate the capital investment process It begins with the visioning and the planning and moves clockwise to the delivery of a project, typically design and construction, and a handover to Public Works Operations, who are the group that predominantly maintain and operate our infrastructure. Next slide. So here we have a typical capital project and the work plans that span about 2 to 5 years. And in some cases, it might be more. And the David Dunlop Observatory, for example, is a good example. That delivery time is well over 10 years once we see it into its full implementation. Feasibility studies can take a year. Environmental assessments can take up to 2 years. And functional and detailed design, depending on their complexity, can take 2 years. The purpose of a feasibility study is to understand the current state of the surrounding environment and to review design alternatives. And some projects require that environmental assessments be undertaken to understand the environmental impacts in undertaking our capital projects. We also have master plans, TMPs, municipal servicing plans, park plans, rec plans. These are all high-level documents that set the framework that drive the identification of growth projects to inform future budgets. And very quickly, when we get to detailed design, that includes our topographical surveys, geotechnical investigations, subsurface utility engineering investigations, regulatory approvals, in order to prepare detailed construction drawings for tendering. So you can see that it's not always, let's just jump out there with shovels and start digging. There's a lot of work that protects city interests before we can actually get some of the shovels in the ground. And once again, once delivery is complete, the asset's handed over back to the client for maintenance and operations. Next slide. The budget before council today is generally defined by projects that fall in 2 primary areas: growth and state of good repair. There are some cases where projects might be initiated as a state of good repair and take into consideration growth components. For example, a road widening will have a growth component and be funded from growth. The incorporation of new streetlights or a traffic signal. So there are scenarios where it's not one or the other, and it's a combination of a variety of funding sources. Next slide. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on this slide as it's important to our understanding of how we get from all the work that I started to discuss into the draft capital budget. The capital plan, the current 2023 and 9-year forecast, sets the timing for capital works by providing placeholders for studies, design, and construction years. The plan is dynamic in that it changes as priorities change. The plan sets short, mid, and long-term project goals. The capital plan is founded on visions and sound engineering application of asset management practices that are the pillars of our community building. The 4 boxes on the left show the primary areas where capital projects are derived from. Capital plan prioritizes new projects from our state of good repair program, which is life cycle repair and replacements of our existing assets that ensure reliability, safety, and performance of service levels. It supports growth through the development and building new fire halls, community centers, pools, libraries, etc. And then any legislated projects that ensure regulatory requirements are met. And lastly, there are projects driven by other drivers, such as furthering the Richmond Hill strategic priorities and working with our municipal partners such as York Region to deliver critical infrastructure to the community. These drivers for the capital projects and programs factor in the direction that are given as part of the budget strategy that do leverage our asset management tools. That includes a ranking system that allows us to prioritize projects across departments on the basis of benefit and risk of deferral and any outcomes from our 2021 asset management plan. In the last box on the right, we arrived at the draft capital budget that's before you today for consideration. Projects that use our asset management tools are assessed on a lot of criteria that include health and safety, environmental and regulatory, reputational, operational risks, as well as achieving strategic priorities and regulatory considerations. The city measures the impact and risk of deferring a project and then uses the measure to compare all projects consistently across the corporation. That measure is called risk, and the current framework defines it as the product of likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure. We take these calculations in a lot of the background work when you see the budget before you, when we start to prioritize projects. So we're not here debating whether or not a fire truck is more important than an element for a community center. All that work is done behind the scenes. Next slide, please. Very quickly, as noted on page 29 of the budget book, due to the nature of the department, it handles the majority of the capital asset deliverables. In 2023, the Planning and Infrastructure Department will be responsible for 75% of the capital budget, which equates to approximately 59% of the total costs of the projects to be delivered. We have a competent team of technical professionals, surveyors, landscape architects, project managers, professional engineers on staff, and finance leads the process and is a very strong partner. We work very closely to develop the capital budget, set the timing, develop funding models, procure contracts, and process tens of millions of dollars of payments to contractors, partners in our industry. Next slide. Sometimes a small capital investment, such as this one, can have a significant impact, create legacy, and inspire values for our community well into the future. Next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the community investments that have been recently completed from left to right. Example of the city's core assets that ensure proper conveyance of stormwater flows from ponds and reliability and safe drinking water, along with a series of park improvements and revitalizations. Next slide. Here we have some before and after photos of the Bethesda Road reconstruction, proper grading and ditching for stormwater conveyance, converting a gravel road to asphalt, and includes illumination. Next slide. I would be remiss if I didn't include some of the ongoing improvements to our city's premier national historic site at the DDO. There's potentially some exciting news in the coming weeks for this project as well, so stay tuned. Next slide. Closing out with some examples of well-needed state of good repair investments to our community centers and administration buildings from the facility management team. Next slide. Here, I want to spend some time talking a little bit about how we've tried to raise the bar and how we communicate with our residents. Communication plans are part of every project that we deliver. Some require greater messaging depending on the scope of work to keep our community informed about the up-to-date impacts regarding maybe it's their commute to work or a better understanding of the benefits of that critical infrastructure investment that the city makes. These examples demonstrate how our delivery teams have raised the bar to accomplish this by leveraging our social media platforms and posts. If you can cue the video, please. This is an example of one of our projects on the major Mackenzie.
At the City of Richmond Hill, we are committed to protecting our natural environment, including trees and native species. When we need to replace aging infrastructure, such as water main pipe that brings safe, clean water to our residents, we use environmentally sustainable ways. For example, when we replaced the water main along Bathurst, we used horizontal directional drilling, reducing the amount of waste being generated and minimizing erosion. We put up fencing around trees in the area to protect them, extending their health and longevity. We installed biodegradable fencing to prevent sediment from running into the creek, and installed catch basin filter cloth to prevent sediment from entering the stormwater system to protect the natural habitat of endangered species. These are just some of the many ways the city is using environmentally sustainable methods to deliver reliable services to the community.
Thank you. Next slide, please. In June of 2022, staff was directed to present a 2023 draft capital budget that continues to manage the city's capital program reflective of corporate priorities, maximizes funding from all sources, development charges, reserve funding, incorporates capital sustainability committee outcomes, and leverages asset management tools to prioritize assets and address the infrastructure gap. In the next handful of slides, you'll see how the budget before you demonstrates this. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. This graphic can be found in the budget book as well on page 8. The budget strategy informs the overall budget that includes investments that achieve council's strategic priorities, renews infrastructure assets aligned with the city's asset management plan, deals with improvements in function and climate resiliency. Stormwater management is a good example of this. Growth-related projects and significant investments in condition and inspection assessments that inform what we do and when we do it. On the right of the slide are some of the examples of those investments that meet these goals. Next slide. This slide is a breakdown of the value and number of projects aligned with council's strategic priorities. The summation and values and number of projects doesn't equate to the total $70 million of this budget, since many of the projects align with one or more of the priorities and they were linked to several. But the way the tally was done was matching it with its leading strategic priority. However, the takeaway is to demonstrate the connection of all of our projects to council priorities. Next slide. This slide breaks down the capital budget between the two groups of growth and state of good repair, with approximately 73% allocated to state of good repair. Next slide. Here's the breakdown of investments by service in different colors, then by subservice, as described earlier in the presentation in the initial summary of the city's assets slide. The left is the 70 million, accompanied by the pre-approved amounts on the right. So you can see all the different categories of where this year's budget is invested in. And the next handful of slides can also be found in the budget book. Next slide. Here we have a summary of significant state of good repair and growth projects, identifying the funding sources. The takeaway here is that there's significant state of good repair work and that many projects are funded by a combination of tax as well as rates. Next slide. This graph is similar in that it breaks down the 9-year forecast in the same areas by service and subservice, totaling just over $1 billion in the forecast. Next slide. In closing out the last few slides, it is appropriate to talk and highlight some of the improvements over the last couple of years that staff have made. We've led a transformation in how the capital budget is prepared in order to integrate asset management practices into the process, which ultimately ensures the best value for dollar at the current year for the benefit of all of our residents. Project requests have been automated to simplify ranking and prioritization. Budget guide was developed and formal establishment of staff working groups led by an executive team of directors from across the organization. The outcomes have all been positive, creating a more robust process with greater collaboration and transparency. Next slide. Our industry is still not immune from the impacts of the global supply chain and the challenges that the world has been experiencing over the last couple of years. Demand has remained high for construction industry due to the infrastructure gaps and housing demand that drives infrastructure needs that have resulted in overall construction growth in the past 18 months. This growth, combined with the challenges of COVID, have resulted in these pressures from supply chain, material price increases, as well as pending provincial regulatory changes. Next slide. The city is well positioned, as stated earlier, and is now developing a plan to address future pressures. The city relies on different levels of government to support infrastructure needs from York Region, the province, and the federal government. In order to support council's decision today, it's appropriate to demonstrate their support and support for infrastructure. The province's belief is that well-maintained infrastructure is the foundation of a strong, vibrant economy and the cornerstone of prosperous communities. The federal government supports prosperous communities across Canada by investing in infrastructure projects through the Canadian Community Building Fund. And AMO recognizes the critical importance of municipal infrastructure as the foundation for economic and social development, environmental protection, for quality of life. So now council has an opportunity to support infrastructure through their endorsement of the capital budget to ensure investments in infrastructure that meet the needs of the community they serve now and into the future. Industry partners such as the Residential Civil and Construction Alliance of Ontario, along with the Ontario Sewer Water Main Construction Association, have collectively worked together to support local government by advocating for the importance of investing in critical core infrastructure through education, outreach, and commissioning of professional studies to support the importance of investing in infrastructure. And on the slides here, you see some excerpts from those studies from industry. This concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll pass it over to the City Treasurer, Gigi Lee, to provide an overview of the funding impacts related to the 2023 budget and forecast, after which we'll be happy to answer any questions from the Budget Chair and Council as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Massaro.
I'll now turn our focus on the capital budget and forecast funding. So essentially, the funding of the capital program that you have just seen on the previous slides. Next slide, please. This graph is an excellent depiction of the history of the city's capital budget, as well as the upcoming trend as presented in the 2023 capital budget and 9-year forecast. The bars indicate the total capital spend or the forecast to spend by funding sources. The blue represents the tax-supported reserve funds, namely the contribution from tax. The yellow represents all other funding sources, including development charges, cash in lieu of parkland, rate-supported reserve funds, grants, and third-party funding. What you notice is that over the last 10 years, the capital budget fluctuated quite a bit in both the total capital budget approved as well as the tax-supported capital program, especially in 2020 and 2021 as a result of the uncertainty brought forward by the pandemic. An important takeaway from this graph is the trend of the capital budget and forecast, which is a very robust program with $1.2 billion of investments anticipated over the next 10 years. The tax-supported capital program is increasing to reflect the investment that's needed in the state of good repair on existing infrastructure, addressing the infrastructure gap and backlog, as well as the upcoming life cycle renewal and rehabilitation of city infrastructure in place back in the 80s and 90s. As noted in the upper yellow portion of the bars, the increases primarily correspond to adding new infrastructure investments to accommodate growth and development within the municipality. It's a culmination of the city's plans and strategies. Next slide, please. This table is taken from page 74 of the budget book. It provides a high-level summary of the anticipated spending over the next 10 years and the corresponding funding sources. As noted on the previous slide, the total investment is almost $1.2 billion. At the top of the table, we can see that $707 million, or 63%, is related to growth assets, while the remaining is investments on state of good repair and existing assets. The bottom half of the table identifies the various funding sources to provide funding for this 10-year capital program. Next slide, please. Funding of the capital budget is shown in the two pie charts, highlighting the distribution of the funding for the 2023 capital budget on the left, as well as the funding distribution for the pre-approved projects. Next slide, please. This graph ties back to the earlier table, identifying the funding distribution of the 9-year forecast. As you can see, more than 1/3 of the forecast is to be funded by tax-supported reserve funds, while another 1/3 from development charges, as well as cash in lieu of parkland, which are the primary sources of growth-related funding. And these are used to fund for growth-related infrastructure. Next slide, please. The previous number of slides highlighted the funding that will be required from the various sources to fund a very robust capital program and the investment in keeping our community livable and strong. One of our financial goals is sustainable funding to ensure wise management of resources now and well into the future. Maintaining a state of good repair of aging infrastructure and a growing community require funding and financing methodology that impact the capital-related reserve funds. This slide highlights the reserve funds that are utilized to support the capital program. I'll go into the details of each over the next coming slides. Next slide, please. As mentioned in the start of this presentation, the capital budget process began in the spring of 2022. In preparation of this capital budget, and in anticipation of the financial impact of provincial legislation, a prioritization exercise took place in the fall, which resulted in a reduced tax-supported capital budget and a review of the growth projects in anticipation of the impact from Bill 23. From that exercise, almost $11 million were deferred or projects moved to future years or cash flowed over multiple years to recognize that some projects may take longer than 1 year to complete. So we're matching the funding to the timing of the expenditure so as to overall reduce the impact and pressure on the reserve funds. Next slide, please. Focusing on the tax-supported reserve funds, these are primarily funded through transfers from the operating budget to fund for the repair and replacement of city-owned infrastructure, and it's the main source of state of good repair funding. More than 1/3 of the 10-year capital program is to be funded by tax-supported reserve funds. For a number of years, staff and council have recognized that the municipal infrastructure cap poses the most significant financial sustainability challenge for Richmond Hill, as well as other municipalities. In 2015, Council approved a capital asset sustainability fee of 1% annually as added contribution to the reserve funds for 10 years. In 2019 and 2020, Council considered the financial sustainability strategy and increasing the contribution to address the funding gap. As the asset management plan has informed of a greater infrastructure need, the financial sustainability strategy will be updated once the non-core assets are incorporated into the enterprise asset management system, along with the completion of other master plans, and the impact of Bill 23 will be analyzed as well for a comprehensive financial sustainability strategy. Next slide, please. Rate-supported reserve funds provide for water, wastewater, as well as stormwater-related repairs and replacement. The primary source of funding is from the water rates and the stormwater management fee. These reserve funds are intended to be self-sufficient. Financial plan updates are done regularly to ensure long-term sustainability. In 2023, a review of the stormwater management funding and rate structure will be done for long-term financial sustainability of that reserve. Overall, about 20% of the capital investments in the 10-year program are funded from these reserve funds. Next slide, please. Other capital reserve funds include the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly federal gas tax. Richmond Hill receives a yearly allocation of approximately $6 million. In 2023, the funds are being allocated to eligible state of good repair facility projects, as well as road reconstruction projects. Although it started off as a grant, the CCBF has become a steady source of funding for the city's capital program. Development charges are collected to recover the capital costs associated with growth within the municipality. Municipalities are empowered to impose these charges via the Development Charges Act. DCs are then utilized to fund growth-related infrastructure. A number of growth capital projects are currently part of the 10-year capital program, including new facilities, parks, as well as road widening and expansions. Bill 23, passed by the province on November 28th of 2022, amends a number of pieces of legislation, including Development Charges Act and the Planning Act. These changes impact development charges, community benefits charges, as well as parkland dedication. These changes also will negatively impact the city's ability to collect revenues to fund for growth-related capital infrastructure. Next slide, please. Revenues are also collected and are derived from new development for cash and move parkland. Cash and move parkland are funds to purchase parkland, as well as for development and redevelopment and revitalization of major parks, as well as some park amenities. This reserve fund is one of the primary sources for the capital budget and forecast. And as I mentioned earlier on the previous slide, the forecast assumes a level of revenue from this funding source that is now impacted by the legislative changes, and the city's ability to fund growth-related capital expenditures will be impacted. Next slide, please. This slide shows at a very high level the projects that are funded by the Canada Community Building Fund, or formerly the federal gas tax. This fund is a federal grant to municipalities. This funding is provided biannually for the purpose of supporting infrastructure and priorities. Cities have flexibility to select where to allocate this funding based on the 19 project categories that are prescribed by the fund. Richmond Hill has over the last couple of years prioritized this funding to provide for eligible projects in roads and active transportation, as well as life cycle and renewal of facilities to alleviate the pressures on the city's tax-supported reserve funds. Next slide, please. Financial grants and funding sources are made available to Richmond Hill to invest in the community while reducing the property tax support requirement and the reliance on the city's reserve funds. Staff actively monitor grant intakes and work to identify eligible projects within the current council-approved budget to submit for funding with the intent to decrease the direct costs to the city. This slide highlights some of the grant funding the city has received and the capital projects funded. Those are the 3 projects that you see over to the left that are funded. To the right is a list that identifies the applications that are underway and potential grant funding for some of the city's capital projects. If approved, city funding will be returned to the original funding sources. Appendix C of the staff report identifies projects that can be shovel-ready. These are projects that staff may have the capacity to complete should funding become available, but are not allocated funds through the current capital budget. The list is evaluated annually. These grant contingent projects will not be advanced and will not go forward for capital approval unless that grant funding becomes available. Overall, this slide is to highlight the ongoing efforts by staff to identify and apply for grants and third-party funding to decrease the overall cost to the city. Next slide, please. In closing, I'd like to emphasize that the city's assets are in good shape. The 2023 capital budget recognizes the ongoing work of the official plan, along with other master plans. This work, along with the ongoing advancement and evolution of the asset management plan, will inform the city's longer-term capital investment needs. The 9-year forecast captures critical projects to inform council of the required investments and is intended to align and adapt to changing priorities as new information becomes available. As projects are developed and implemented over time, the 10-year capital program will be refined based on evidence. Despite the looming financial impact of Bill 23, there's no immediate impact to the city as it's well positioned. Continuous investments are needed to support the city's critical infrastructure, and staff will assess and balance the impact of the legislative changes that affect the city's long-term financial plan and will incorporate as part of a comprehensive financial sustainability strategy. The next slide, please, highlights the recommendations of the report. Mr. Chair, I will conclude my presentation. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Treasurer Lee. It's a great report, and it's taking a lot of information and putting it into a document where it's easy, rather simple for council to understand. There's so much work that's done. I want to thank the entire finance department and your team, Director Lee and Executive Director Massaro for your work and for this council. We had a sustainability committee struck 4 years ago that prioritized how best to spend our capital dollars. We put a tax rate supported cap on capital projects, and until we did that analysis, and 1 year from now, before our next budget, that analysis will be complete, and we'll have a better sense of what what are the priorities. We didn't want to spend a lot of money. Basically, the bulk of Richmond Hill's assets were built in the 80s and 90s, and they're reaching that 30-40 year mark where they're all requiring some sort of repair or maintenance. And so you can see in the next 10 years, we've got a lot more projected capital expenses than we had in the past. So we've gone through an extensive exercise to make sure we do that properly. For example, in that Financial Sustainability Committee, we took a $210 million proposed civic precinct building project and significantly reduced that. We had a $70 million DDO allocation of funds that we reduced to $11 million, and we may raise that, but pending the outcome of the sustainability study. But we made some decisions last term that left us in a position that we've got increasing demand on our capital dollars, but we've got a plan to get there and manage it. But as was said, we've got some new risks and some new curveballs with Bill 23 and other regulatory changes that are going to impact what we do here in Richmond Hill. But overall, we're in great shape. I appreciate and understand and respect the recommendations. I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Karen Silovitz to speak first, because she apparently has an additional request to make regarding the draft capital budget. So we'll start it off there, and then anyone else who has questions or any other concerns, we'll just raise your hand and we'll go in turn. Okay, Councillor Tree is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to, with thanks and respect, bring all the recommendations forward that are in front of us. And right off the bat, I would like to propose one amendment to be 4.1G, and we can bring that up on the screen so that we can have it on the floor at the same time as the other recommendations for discussion by council. Staff have been informed, our clerk has been informed, and members of council have been informed. And I can read that into the public record, that staff be direct. So 4.1G, my amendment is that staff be directed to investigate the feasibility of advancing the Cedar Avenue water main replacement project, with design commencing in 2023 and construction in 2024, funded from the appropriate reserve account. Report back at the February 8th, 2023 meeting of council. So I want to thank all members of staff who worked closely with me on this, and my residents and myself. We are deeply appreciative of the manner in which you tackled this and understood the reasons for the reasons and necessity for us to bring this forward now. Just as a quick background, the Cedar Avenue water main has broken 3 times in as many years in the past years, and it has caused extensive damage as a result of the breaks to a number of residences along Cedar Avenue, specifically those who have below grade driveways and garages. It has caused the flooding of those basements. And it is in discussions with the executive director Massaro and Bob Levesque. It has been explained to me that this water main is indeed nearing the end of its life cycle, and there is a very high probability that we could face another break. So I believe it is in the best interests of the corporation, as well as this council and residents, that we move this forward with no negative impact to any other priority projects that are already on file for 23 and 24. We're bringing it forward 1 year. So design in 23 and a construction in 24, as opposed to design in 24 and construction in 25. So we're narrowing that window, and hopefully we'll be able to avoid any kind of breaks up until the time of new construction. So on behalf of my residents, thank you. And also to City Manager Jocelyn, thank you very much for your attention to this. And we have a number of staff members here who can answer any questions that council may have. I sent it to you all last night so that you are aware of this. That's really most of all I have to say. Just again, thank you so much to our senior staff who put this remarkable, comprehensive capital budget together. I believe we are indeed in good shape, and we will continue to be in good shape. And I'm very pleased to see the number of Ward 5 issues and matters that are contained within this budget and the DDO. And I really look forward to the next year and the next 9 years when we see this budget come to fruition. So again, my thanks, Mr. Chair.
Hey, thank you, Councillor Silovitz. So with that, we have a motion on the floor. There's no seconder required at the committee level, and there's 7 recommendations with that additional item G. And anyone who does have questions on that, should it pass, there will be a staff report to be dealt with on February 8th, meeting of council. So next is Councillor Tree. You want to?
Great, thank you so much, Ms. Chair. Through Ms. Chair to our staff, and I do have 4 or 5 questions here. Might be quite a long list. The first one regarding to the 2023 budget for either $74 billion vs the pre-approved $10 billion. Is that $10 million part of the 74, or is it separate as total 84?
Sure.
Through the chair to the councillor, it's separate. So it's 74 million plus the 10. So it's a total capital program of $84 million.
Good, got it. Thank you so much. My second question regarding the Bill 23 impact. I saw there are 2 slides. One is regarding to $28 billion because of Bill 23 impact. Another one is under the development charge or development fundings. There is only a statement saying there are going to be impact. So what's the relationship of this $20 billion vs that undefined development fundings caused by Bill 23? Yeah, if you find out the slide for the development fundings, maybe 2 slides ahead, there is the $28 billion. I forgot the.
So that's actually slide 35. Through the chair to the councillor. So those are not related. On slide 35, we have a bullet that indicates a tax supported capital budget of $28 million. And as a separate note, that we have been doing a review of growth related projects in anticipation of the financial impact of Bill 23. So that $28 million is not the impact of Bill 23.
Got it. Thank you so much. My next question regarding to, we have a funded park renovation project named as Rainbow Pond South Trail renovation. It's around $1 million. I'm just questioning here is, if we do have further questions regarding that fundings, can we shifting, or is it possible, feasible, can we shifting that funding to other purpose? If following, we have more questions regarding to that one, because I was being engaged by the residents regarding to the Rainbow Pond project very late, just a few, around 1 week ago. I cannot comment, should I approve this budget or not, right? So my questions here is, if this council passed that one, in future, like mid of this year, is there any way we can shifting that funding to other purpose, or we stop funding? So what we can do for it?
Through the chair to the counselor, on slide 41, we do have this, the Rumble Pond project listed as one of the projects with potential grant funding. So in the event that we are successful with the grant funding, we'll be able to alleviate $1 million of the committed reserve fund. And that $1 million will then go towards other projects.
Got it. Thank you. I have my last question regarding tennis. I see the growth project. There is one of the tennis court. I'm assuming it's a new tennis court. My questions here is a simple one. For the resurfacing services, is this part of this capital project, or we're going to have another budget meeting discussing about the resurfacing services for tennis court?
Through the chair to Councillor Tree. Is there any specific resurfacing project that you're thinking about, that you're looking for a response on? What I can tell you is about the program as a whole, that through Public Works Operations, they will be undertaking a larger study that does condition assessments across all the city's tennis facilities, and determines and ranks and prioritizes future capital investments in order to bring them to a state of good repair or revitalize them. In some instances, depending on the type of treatment, they may be done through capital, but if they're sometimes smaller in nature, in some instances, they're handled through operations.
Operation project. That's what I'm looking for. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Next I have to speak is Mayor West.
Thank you so much. I actually appreciate all the time that the staff has spent with me up to this point, and I don't really have any particular questions. I just did want to thank Councillor Silovitz for bringing forward that item. I think that, and I appreciate the way that the motion is written, is that we're going to take a closer look at it to make sure that it is actually something that needs to be done in that time frame. I suspect, given that they're ductile iron water mains, that they're probably like Swiss cheese at this point, given the age that they are at. So I'm looking forward to that. I would like to thank our staff, and this is all staff. I mean, I know that Executive Director Massaro and Director Lee are kind of spearheading this, leading the parade, so to speak. But I know that this is across the corporation exercise. So every single person really that works in this corporation has got their hand on this budget and the upcoming operating budget too. So thank you to everybody. You know, I won't ask any questions about Bill 23 at this point, because I know we have a special council meeting on the 30th. But, you know, looking at some of the numbers here and how much we rely on, you know, development charges and parkland cash in lieu to fund so many, I mean, it's just mind-boggling, so many important projects, because the whole idea with development charges is that growth goes some, hopefully, great distance in paying for growth. I'm looking forward to that, to seeing what the actual numbers look like as we know them at this point with Bill 23. But this is actually a good, I mean, it's obviously the purpose of today's meeting is to pass the capital budget, but it's also a good precursor to our background in the exercise that will have to be gone through to produce the report for the 30th. So anyway, thank you so much to staff again. And, you know, I really think that, you know, when I look at this budget and all the numbers and everything that are incorporated in this, the takeaway that I always have with this is that, you know, this exercise is about dollars and cents in a lot of ways, but really at the end of the day, it's about what we are going to invest in to make our community great. You know, what we're investing in as new infrastructure and new amenities for all of our citizens, including our new citizens, and also what we're investing in to make sure that the amenities that we do have and the services that we do deliver are in a state of good repair, and that they're going to function well and function well into the future. And, you know, I know as a citizen, which I still am, of course, as we all are, I even myself sometimes take it for granted when you turn the water switch on and the water comes out. But, you know, like further to Councillor Silovitz's motion, it's a good exclamation mark on the end of that. You know, there is a whole set of infrastructure that's very complex and is aging that produces that water coming out of the faucet. It's the parks that we have. It's the exciting new parks that we are hopefully going to be getting in on the horizon. It's amenities like the Richmond Center for the Performing Arts that, we invested in many years ago, and all of the other pieces of infrastructure that we're investing in to make the community the kind of community that we all want to live in. So I realize that this is a numbers exercise, but really at the end of the day, it's a whole lot more than a number exercise. And I think that's the thing that I always try to take away after looking at all these numbers for a long time and, getting all bleary eyed. But at the end of the day, it's really not really about numbers. So anyway, thanks very much for the work, and look forward to having this pass.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And next is Councillor Davidson.
Thank you. And through you, Chair. Obviously, this is my first budget, and I have a couple of really basic questions. One is on slide 30, it indicates the blue is grown in 2023 compared to 2022, which means that we'll need tax dollars to cover some of these projects, more dollars than we did last time. I think it goes $45 instead of $16 this year. It's $25.87. Does that indicate a need to raise taxes, or does that just say we have this pool of tax reserve, we have a pool of money, and now we're going to need this much out of that pool of money that we think we'll have in 2023?
Through the chair to the councillor. So the quick answer is yes, we will be needing additional funds. So as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, back in 2015, council and staff recognized that there's a gap. So we started incrementally adding 1% of a tax rate every year towards these reserve funds to fund for that big block of blue. So as you can see, that blue increases over time, and in the future years, though those numbers are significantly higher. So definitely it will require a revisit of the financial sustainability strategy, as well as potential tax rate increases in order to fund for the state of good repair.
Thank you. And I don't know if you can answer this question, but the yellow part that says alternative funding, and I know we're not going to dissect development charges, but considering that we know the province has made changes on some of the funds, on some of the ways the city gets funds, does staff have a recommendation for what alternative means, considering some of the things that are being taken away? I mean, those yellow lines are getting taller and taller as years go on, assuming that we're losing a third of what I saw as funding through development charges. Do we have some ideas for that alternative yellow part?
Through the chair to the councillor. So that yellow part right now represents not just growth related funding. So it represents development charges, cash on the parkland, as well as all the other sources, including rate supported. So everything but tax. So going back to your comment, councillor, about the $330 million or 1/3 of a forecast, that's the total growth program that's anticipated to be funded by DCs. So Bill 23 will impact a portion of that. So we'll go into the details of that impact, obviously, on Monday at the January 30th special council meeting, where we talk about the implications of Bill 23. But to answer your question, we have looked into alternative funding sources, and one of the alternative funding sources that have been communicated from the province is potentially additional funding from the province or the federal government. That we have not heard any details of since the initial announcement. So that is still very uncertain. With respect to alternative sources, unfortunately, from the municipality standpoint, its alternative will be potential tax rate impact. And that is why it's important to look at the entire capital program as well as funding as a whole, so that we can develop a comprehensive financial sustainability strategy. We talked about the section that is blue earlier, not too long ago, which also represents potential impact to the tax rate. So unfortunately, whatever's not funded by development charges or growth related revenues will potentially have an impact to tax rate as well, adding on to the pressure that we're already feeling with respect to the blue.
Thank you. And one last question through you, Mr. Chair. Looking at this presentation today and just coming in cold, and I know there's also an operating budget, but I'm assuming that the expertise of staff says, if you pass this budget, we have in consideration the other budget, and we're not doing anything here that, pushes the envelope in terms of what we can actually promise and deliver with the money that we know we're getting at this point. Is that a fair question? I mean, if nothing changed, this budget is based on money that we know we're going to have in 2023 to cover. I'm just, because I'm new, I'm worried about going, yeah, yay for the operational budget. And then we see yay for the capital budget. Then we see the operational budget. You understand? I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing based on what money we know we have to spend.
Absolutely. As Executive Director Mazzaro mentioned earlier, we're very well positioned for the 2023 capital budget. When we look at the $84 million is funding that has already been secured. So over the next couple of weeks, starting on February 7th, that's when we go into the operating budget deliberations. But definitely, when we looked at the capital budget, we definitely also make sure that we made all the connections that are needed with the operating budget as well, so that we don't get any surprises.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Regional Local Councillor Chan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to echo the mayor's comments and my deep gratitude to not only the two presenters here, Executive Director and our Treasurer, but every single staff who stand behind you or in front of you sometimes. But thank you. I know it's not an easy job, and making it easier to understand for some of us anyway, for the numbers. And it has been certainly quite a bit of uncertainty still is with the economic situation, not to mention about, thank you, provincial government, for adding on the stress, Bill 23 and other legislation that would have perhaps create more challenges when we're talking about projecting out, estimating the future expenses. I particularly like the wording, community investments. And that's particular slide that show our late mayor. It's all about community. We're making decisions here for the dollars and cents that go into all this capital project is really for the community. And so I like that term. I'm sure that in communication that comes out later on, that's something should be really truly emphasized. All this, the current council and the past councils, we are really putting dollars into those capital projects for the benefits of our businesses and residents, or people who call it home or work here. And I particularly pleased, my heart is still DDO, along with, I believe, my colleague sitting at the other end. Number of DDO projects have been shown there, like the trail 2.2 kilometers that was done, I think, over a year ago, and more to come, and also showcasing the first indoor track in the XFL Arena. So those are achievements, a good news story, in fact, that money well spent in investments. And my only question, maybe not so much question, but seeking clarification through the chair, is on slide 28. That shows all those potential funders. I'm wondering, through you, Mr. Chair, would consideration been given keeping an eye on the Green Municipal Fund, actually being administered by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, FCM. The city or the town in the past have received funding from the Green Municipal Fund, and also under the Partners of Climate Adaptation. So through Mr. Chair.
Through Mr. Chair to Councillor Chen, the city is always proactively seeking funding, regardless of where. One of our staff members through the city manager's office is the one, Sleaze Khan is the one who generally seeks out those grants, and it would include but not limited be include but not limited to the ones already identified as part of the presentation. And I bring your attention to refocus on the large one that we're very anxiously awaiting results on, related to the rail overpass for the DDO, and that would be a significant donation, probably one of the largest, should we be successful.
Thank you. So thank you for the answer. So in the future, when you do get money, this probably the FCM sitting $1 billion altogether, of course, not all for Richmond Hill. I gather they would be recognized as such in the future presentation. Since we're watching for any potential opportunity to get funding through the Green Municipal Fund in the next 9 years. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you. And Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much. Through you, the chair, I'd also like to echo the mayor's comments. I really appreciate everything that staff have done here. I definitely appreciate the time they've spent with me as well, addressing a number of questions that I had prior to the presentation today. I do have, I guess, a question sort of around timing, and it's a little bit similar to what Simon was asking. With the grant funding details, I see, Kozak Park revitalization as part of that, the grant funding details. And if that, I guess I'm trying to sort out the actual parameters of the revitalization. If they're not finalized, then something that we've already had some discussions on might fit within that if the funding did come through. But if the funding doesn't come through, it's something where I'd be interested in perhaps doing something similar to what Councillor Silovitz has done in terms of putting an amend motion together. And I'm just trying to sort out timing wise how I can sort out what I should or shouldn't be doing in regards to something that's particular to Kozak Park.
Through the chair to the councillor, Kozak Park revitalization is currently slated for 2024. So we have a grant application that's currently under review. Should we be successful with the grant application, then we'll have the funding to proceed. Otherwise, it's slated for 2024 delivery.
Hey, thank you. So if the concern I had with this park was something where I felt that it really couldn't wait till 2024, then, and we could take this offline, but, perhaps, if I wanted to do an amendment similar to what Councillor Silovitz has proposed, I trust I still have the time to do something like that.
Well, Councillor, we're hoping to pass a capital budget today to go forward, and this was a very unusual request, and it's of sort of an emergency nature, and I was a little concerned about the precedent, and I know that every councillor's got something in their ward that they'd prefer to have done this year than next, but I wouldn't be appropriate. I wouldn't be able to support moving forward a project like that, or even getting a staff report at this point. This is really come at the 11th hour, and there's a lot of work that Councillor Silovitz did in the past week to have her motion ready, and a lot of work with staff, and we're just we're reaching a deadline right now on capital. Anyways, lots of time for operating and other discussions.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll leave the questions right there. Thank you.
And Councillor Thompson, I think our CAO wants to respond as well to that. I'm just being playing the hard line, but maybe she has something else to offer.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I agree with your comments. I just wanted to caution the councillor that we do have a grant application in progress, and moving this project at all could jeopardize us getting any funding on that because the timelines have already been articulated through the grant. So, we can certainly have a conversation offline in terms of Kozak Park, but I think leaving the process to see how our grant funding application comes through would be perhaps wise on our part.
No, I appreciate that through the chair, and we may have a conversation offline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Okay, Councillor Liu, you had a question there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I would like to also thank staff for this presentation. Very, very comprehensive, like always. And I'm very excited to I look forward to the Bayview Hill Park revitalization project. I think this is a long time coming, and my residents are looking forward to it. I just have a few questions through you, Mr. Chair. When I look at slide 20, the growth projects, there are 4 pickleball courts and 1 tennis court. I'm just wondering, I forgot how many are there in the Bayview Hill Park, but where are those 4 pickleball courts and the 1 tennis court? Through Mr. Chair.
Okay. Executive Director Massaro.
Thank you for the question through the chair, Councillor Liu. The 4 pickleball courts are in Bayview Hill Park.
Beautiful. Thank you. And the tennis court?
Bayview Hill Park. Splash pad, Bayview Hill Park. Winter skating area, Bayview Hill Park. Multi-use court, Bayview Hill Park.
Very good. Thank you for confirming that. Yes, appreciate that. And also on page 30, I'm just have a question regarding just like Councillor Davidson. When I look at the blue and the yellow, so 2023 is like almost double, both the blue and yellow, and 2024 is also another double. Can staff through you, Mr. Chair, elaborate a little bit more so that I can have more understanding of the increase?
Treasurer.
Through the chair to Councillor Liu. So 2023, you're looking at the blue section, which is the tax supported funds. So essentially, again, when we look at 2024, that numbers also goes from 26 to $49 million. So that's reflecting the increased investments that's needed for the state of good repair of existing infrastructure. Again, I go back to my earlier comment about the upcoming life cycle renewal and rehabilitation of city infrastructure that were in place 30, 40 years ago. So it's almost like a house that we have, we're going through that bump where we're now having to spend more money in repairing and replacing those major infrastructure. And that's why you're seeing over the next little while, and that's informed by our asset management plan, as well as the enterprise asset management system. That's the investments that are recommended over the next 10 years for our existing capital assets and infrastructure.
Thank you. Okay, so go ahead.
When we look at the yellow portion, again, yellow, those sections actually represent some of the growth projects that are coming in. So we'll start spending some growth related dollars on David Dunlap Observatory Park, for example, Mill Pond Park revitalization. So these are some of the growth related projects that are starting to kick off over the next little while. That's why you see that yellow funding start creeping up over the next 4 to 5 years.
Thank you very much. Also, what happened to 2028? The yellow part is like 3 times the year before. Any particular reason?
Through the chair to Councillor Liu. So that is actually the year where we have a number of growth-related projects coming on board, specifically facilities. So we currently have the North Leslie Community Center slated for 2028. Also with Richmond Hill Central Library expansion, Central Library expansion, Richmond Green revitalization. So a number of big significant facility projects, growth related, that are coming on board. And that's why you see that very big spike in 2028 to reflect that.
Thank you very much. That's clarified my my misunderstanding. Okay, thank you very much. So that's all my questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Were you hoping it was for Bayview Hill that year, Councillor Liu?
No, but I'm looking forward to North Leslie on 2028. Thank you.
North Leslie's Ward 3 also. So that's the big cost there coming up. Okay, so everyone who wanted to speak has spoken. Councillor Hsu, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for the presentation and the great effort the city staff has made. And it's really a comprehensive budget, and it's really great. I only have one question on slide 38 on the section Development Charges Reserve Fund. It states that 2023 development charges account for 12.1% of this year capital budget. Does that mean we may have 12.1 shortfall? And as you said, we can get help from federal or provincial government external funding. If there's nothing coming, does that mean we have potential tax hike for this percentage? Can we interpret like this?
As I mentioned earlier, there is no immediate impact of Bill 23. So when we look at what funding sources we have already earmarked for 2023, those are dollars and funding that we have secured. So for example, when we look at the development charges, those are development charges that we have collected. So the impact of Bill 23 will be on future capital projects, i.e. the ones that I just mentioned in 2028. So those are the ones that may potentially be, well, that will be potentially impacted by Bill 23 and the fact that we can now expect lesser development charges to be collected.
I have one follow-up question. Is there any figures or any forecast predictions, something like that? If there's really no external funding for the shortfall for the development charges, is there any figures we can project how much the percentage for the tax hike?
Well, Councillor, our staff's coming forward with an elaborate report for Monday. It's 6 days. They're going to be discussing this further. Is there anything else you wanted to add that affects this capital budget? Yeah, so it's just future shortfalls. 2023, we have the development charges in place. We're spending what we've already collected. So you could ask that question again. Okay, was there anything else, Councillor Hsu?
No.
Okay. So everyone's spoken, and Councillor Tree wanted to speak again.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, to our city staff. Regarding to the trend, I think there's a slide you're showing the trend about from 2013, I remember, is going into 2020, the details. So curiosity, so we understand during the COVID-19, we do have a lot of issues. That's why our budget, also our spendings on those projects is less. But look at the chart back to 2024. 2026 and 2028 is huge. So I'm seeing here is like a double. The next year, 2024 will double, and then reach to the 2028 will be peak. Just curiosity, what type of the projects in the pipelines leading this big cost here? Thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor. Those particular years that you've identified, 24, 6, and 8, are, as even stated by the budget chair, a lot of the city's assets are coming to end of life. A lot of the major development across the city happened 25 to 35 years ago. And no different than the analogy that was provided, like our homes, after many years, we have to replace significant components all at the same time. Our furnace goes, then the roof goes, and then maybe our driveway and our windows. So a lot of our facilities and assets are reaching that state at which we need to invest in a lot of our capital repair and replacements. And, you know, the significant one, as stated by Treasurer Lee, in 2028, North Leslie is going to be a large investment. While that project is already somewhat cash flowed and broken down into the design and construction years, construction is a very large component in why you see 2028 being as large as it is. A new community center these days can run you from, depending on what the facilities within a community center might be, but if they include things like pools and arenas and all the other great things, you know, you can be anywhere between 80 million upwards of 120. So they're significant for sure. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Davidson?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, we can't anticipate everything. What happens if there's a sudden emergency, like a sinkhole on a Richmond Hill Road or some kind of infrastructure issue? Where does the money come for unexpected big ticket fix-ups?
Great question.
Through the chair to Councillor Davidson. So the city has a number of reserves and reserve funds. So depending on what that emergency is, we utilize the most appropriate reserve or reserve fund to fund for that. Also, in the event that there are other emergencies or events that come up, we also have the tax rate stabilization reserve as well. So those are some of the reserves that we utilize to make sure that we are maintaining a steady impact, so that we're not, you know, in 1 year charging 9% tax rate and then back to 2% or whatever that situation may be. So we do have our reserves and reserve funds to balance the expenditures that we have to pay for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I don't see anyone else want to speak in a second round. We have a motion on the floor. I am 100% in support of going forward and looking forward to these products coming online. And I'm confident that although the pressure is there for the future, that we've taken all the right steps and have measures in place to make sure we're going to be able to absorb these growing costs of maintaining our capital infrastructure. So with that, I'll call the vote on the motion. All in favor of recommendations in 4.1? Okay, any opposed? Okay, that carries. Okay, thank you very much. Now the next item is 4.2, and that's going to be a presentation by Treasurer Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll now present the next item on the agenda, item 4.2, SRCFS 0.23.001, capital project financial status. The capital project and financial status is an annual financial report presented to keep council apprised and informed of all ongoing approved capital projects. This report provides the status of existing capital projects, to propose budget and funding adjustments, and to recommend closure of capital projects that have been completed with the goal to return surplus funds back to their original funding sources. Next slide. The objectives of undertaking this annual financial report exercise are listed on this slide. It's primarily to maintain and improve credibility and instill public confidence in capital delivery at the city. Managing and reporting on capital projects regularly also demonstrate fiscal responsibility. In most cases, the capital status reporting is done in conjunction with the capital budget to improve budget estimation and allocation of capital funding. When the projects are reviewed, either closed or recommended for budget or funding adjustments, we're alleviating funds and returning surpluses to reserves and reserve funds so as to release the encumbered funding for other capital projects. Next slide, please. This slide serves as a summary of the funds being returned. Overall, 17.27 million will be returned to the various reserves and reserve funds, with the majority of them as a result of closing projects, returning over $16 million. This equates to approximately 12% of the approved budget. Approximately $830,000 is also being returned from budget and funding adjustments. I'll go into the details of these on the upcoming slides. Next slide, please. And next slide. A total of 187 projects are recommended for closure, of which 183 of them are city projects. This slide highlights the projects closed by delivering departments. As you can see, almost 58% of the projects closing reside in the Planning and Infrastructure Department. As we saw from the earlier presentation, this department delivers the majority of the city's capital program. The median close time of a project is approximately 3 years, as you can see at the bottom of this table, tying back to the typical capital project span of 2 to 5 years that was presented by Executive Director Mazzaro in the previous presentation. The total returned is approximately $8.3 million. The top projects with highest funds being returned are highlighted at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. Similar to the previous slide, this slide captures the third-party projects being recommended for closure and funds being returned. These are projects delivered by an external party, typically the TRCA or the York region, where Richmond Hill would be a party to and provide partial funding for. 4 projects are being recommended for closure, returning approximately $8.1 million. The top projects with highest funds returned are also highlighted at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. A history of funds being returned through the process is shown on this slide. Also removing some of the outliers in years past to show a more reflective picture of the returns from typical capital projects. Returned funds are made available to upcoming capital projects. Next slide, please. Tremendous effort is expended in assessing the projects that are included at the capital budget on an annual basis, as you can see, and as demonstrated from our previous presentation. However, throughout the year, there may be a need to commence or commit to a project that was not anticipated during the capital project and budget process. In 2021, Council approved a framework to manage in-year capital requests, and the capital budget financial monitoring policy was approved. This slide highlights those in-year project situations in 2022 under those categories described and in compliance with the capital budget monitoring policy. It's important to have the controls and reporting mechanisms in place as stated in the policy. This report serves as that reporting mechanism to look back and report back to Council on those in-year requests that were made outside of the capital budget process. Next slide, please. This is a graphical representation of the projects closed by budget approval year. As you can see on this graph, a majority of projects being closed are from the last 3 to 5 years, following that typical capital project span that we just talked about of 2 to 5 years. Third-party projects typically have a higher median close time, primarily because of some of the complexity of these projects. Next slide, please. And next slide. This table shows the active open projects upon closure of the recommended project close. There are 367 projects, city as well as third-party projects combined, mostly with a median open time of 1 year. What that indicates is that these are recently approved capital projects that are being worked on. As you can see at the bottom right of this table, there's about $120 million of budget committed to these open projects. Next slide, please. This last graph summarizes the open city projects into the various project statuses. There are a total of 340 active projects. As you can see, a large majority of these projects are in progress, which is the first column to the left of this graph, or in the budget approval as well as warranty and completed stages. Next slide, please. This is a relatively shorter presentation. The report recommendations are listed on this slide. That concludes my presentation, Mr. Chair, and I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. So who wants to kick off the discussion on this? Councillor Tree.
Thank you so much. I do have a very simple questions. When we talk about the the term, it means the money or funding we did not spend, we return back to the account of our city.
Through the chair to Councillor Tree, that's correct. So these are surplus funds that are being returned to their original funding sources.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, Councillor Silivitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, thank you, Treasurer Lee. Just a couple of questions to you, Mr. Chair. It's wonderful to see black line returns and adjustments. That's fantastic. Always a good news story. What happens if it's a red line adjustment that needs to be made? Where does that money, where would that money have to come from if such an occurrence ever occurred? If there was a deficit? Does it come back to capital budget like in the following year, or does it come straight back to us to let us know there's a deficit?
Sorry, Councillor, but that question, you're moving the staff recommendations?
Oh, yes, I'll move the staff
Okay,
recommendations.
I just want to get that on the floor.
Of course, sorry.
Okay, so you're moving recommendations in 4.2. Go ahead, Treasurer.
Through the chair to Councillor Silivitz. So as part of this report, Appendix B provides for the details of all the budget and funding adjustments. So using your example of should a project be slightly over, through this report is where we would get council's approval, and we'll also include a rationale as to why some projects may be slightly over budget. So that's all included in Appendix B of this report.
Okay, thank you very much. One last question for you, Mr. Chair. Could help me understand exactly what a third party is?
Okay. Through the chair to Councillor Silivitz. So third-party projects are typically led and delivered by an external party such as the TRCA or the York Region. So our role would be to provide that partial funding so that they can deliver those projects.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Anyone else? Any questions on this? Okay, yeah, it is fairly straightforward. There is in the appendix every single project. That's a lot. It's a lot happened. I don't understand why you guys are really slacking in 2010. There's only 1 or 0 projects, and we're getting a lot done now. It's partly tongue in cheek, but is there a reason why are we accounting for projects differently now, or was it truly that absolutely no projects were done in that year? Back in you're showing the history of a city of open in the one chart there. 2010 and 2012, there was zero.
To you, Mr. Chair, so that would be slide 9 of the presentation. So this slide is intended to show the projects that are closed by budget approval year. So what it means here is that through this process, we've closed a number of projects and none of them are from 2010 or 2012, which means they have been closed previously. So they're not part of this close.
I
So
see.
those
Oh,
projects have been closed in years past.
got it. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for all your hard work. Thank you for these presentations. And we look forward to continuing to work with you through this budget process. We've got a motion on the floor with three recommendations in item 4.2. All in favor? Any opposed? That carries unanimously. Okay. And then we just need a motion to adjourn. Mayor West, all in favor? Any opposed? That carries. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone. That concludes our first budget meeting with many more to come.